So Simon Armitage, one-time probation officer, current poet laureate. Can you trust a man with an ill-advised earring like that? Possibly not, but you can trust him to write really good poetry. This poem was originally written as part of a documentary film that Simon Armitage made in 2008 for Channel 4 called The Not Dead, which was all about the aftermath of the Gulf War in 2003. I'm just going to talk you through some of the key things in the poem. So I'm going to dive straight into it. Stanza 1, and we begin on another occasion, very conversational tone. We are just plunged right into the middle of this. On another occasion, there have been other occasions, other conflicts, other similar things like this. So we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank. One of them legs it up the road. So legs it, that very colloquial verb that he uses. Final line of this stanza, probably armed, possibly not. Those two adverbs will return in the poem, and they imply that sense of doubt that whether or not the person who, the speaker in the poem, whether or not he did the right thing, and that question will haunt him for the rest of his life, basically, and it's pinned down there in those two adverbs. Into stanza 2, myself and somebody else and somebody else. Now, that phrase, that noun phrase, somebody else, used twice, is that because he can't remember the names, doesn't want to name them, doesn't want to, identify the guilty partners? They're all of the same mind. All three of us open fire. Three of a kind, all let him fly. That three of a kind, it's almost throwaway, almost flippant, but we know this is a very, very serious poem. And I swear, now we get one of the first examples of enjambment as the verse moves, the stanza moves from stanza 2 into stanza 3 without a pause. I see every round. Now, this stanza 3, begins with that repetition. The first two lines begin with that repetition of I see, that first person. And it's visual. That's the key thing. This memory is visual, it's visceral, it's violent, it lives within him. And that violence is compounded by, as it rips through his life, that really forceful, violent verb, rips, given extra emphasis by the alliteration, every round as it rips through his life. Not just his body, of course, his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. Simon Armitage is an absolute master of using quite conversational phrases, but he kind of twists them and tilts them and gives them an extra meaning. So broad daylight on the other side. It's familiar language, but we're not used to seeing it in that context of a body that has been made transparent. We've hit this looter a dozen times. Even an adverb like so, a conjunction like so, gives it a very conversational feel. That conversational feel to make it authentic. Now, in order to make this documentary, Simon Armitage spoke to and interviewed and took the words of people who had actually fought in this conflict. He wanted this to feel like an authentic testament, the voice of the people who were there. But of course, he sculpts it and he shapes it, and he uses the skills that he's got as a poet to make this this story go beyond just being a simple bit of conversational recollection. He's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Again, that's sort of. It's conversational, but it's almost like the speaker is still grappling with the thing that he saw. More enjambment as we go into the next stanza, into stanza 4. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by, tosses his guts back into his body. That verb, horrible, violent verb, tosses back into his body. Again, it's an image, it's a repulsive image, but he's using deliberately ugly images. He wants us to see for ourselves the horror of war, the visions of mutilated bodies that live within the imagination, the horrified, haunted imagination of someone who's been to war and seen this. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. Carted off, again, another very, violent verb. Not given any respect, any dignity as a human being. More just a cadaver, a corpse, a piece of meat. No longer human. End of story. But of course it's not. His blood shadow stays on the street. this really rich, evocative phrase, blood equals guilt. Out on patrol, I walk right over it, week after week. The repetition there, it stays, it lingers. Then I'm home on leave. Simple conjunctions like then to give it that conversational feel. But I blink and he bursts through the doors of the bank, and another violent verb, burst, to suggest the power of this memory that's haunting him. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. So those two adverbs that we heard in stanza 1 return here, and that ambiguity, that sense of doubt, dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, more violent language. The drink and drugs won't flush him out. So he's trying he's trying any means he can to anaesthetise, to cleanse himself, but he can't do it. And of course we see his desperation there, the things that he's relying on are drink and drugs. He's here in my head when I close my eyes. Very important that a lot of this poem, like earlier images like rip through him and letting fly, that it's in the present tense. This isn't a memory that has been closed off. This isn't a memory that he's sorted out. It is something that continues. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, not left behind in enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land. So here we get these compound adjective phrases: sun-stunned, sand-smothered. This is Iraq, this is the Gulf War, and again, it's this overload of the senses that we're getting here. Smothered and stunned, violent, a sense of oppression. 6 feet under in desert sand. Notice here one of the few instances in the poem of 2 lines that rhyme with each other. Usually, rhyme brings a sense of closure, a sense of something definite. Definitely no closure here, but it does make this emphatic, of course. Near to the knuckle, here and now. This is so typical, as I mentioned, of Simon Armitage, that he would take ordinary, colloquial, idiomatic phrases like near to the knuckle, and he gives them this new life. He makes them visceral, near to the knuckle. You get this sense of this man with his, fists clenched, a desperate man, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Now, we all know blood in Macbeth is this symbol of guilt, and Armitage reuses that here. My bloody hands. His bloody life. We know about the guts that spilled out of him. But of course, there's multiple meanings here. Bloody in the sense of a colloquial swear word. Bloody in the sense of guilty. His life in my hands, the sense of power and control that he had over it, and that he chose on that instinct, on that impulse to shoot, and he is still living with the consequences. So it turns out you can trust a man with an earring like that after all, as long as you're asking him to write a really good poem. But once upon a time, Simon Armitage did write a poem about getting his ear pierced. So I suppose once you've done that, you've got to stick with it. It's part of the brand. Hope everybody is well. Hope to see you again pretty soon. And I'll try and do another one of these videos for each of the poems that you've got to do over the next few weeks as part of your literature remote learning. So I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.